Ever let your sweet potato vines run wild all season, only to dig up a bunch of skinny, pencil-thin roots instead of those big, beautiful tubers you were hoping for? You're not alone. Sweet potatoes are vigorous growers, and if you don't manage that vine growth, all that energy goes into making leaves instead of the roots you actually want to eat. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the complete process of pruning sweet potatoes for maximum yield and plant health. We'll cover when to start, exactly how to do it, and how to keep up with maintenance throughout the season. Plus, stick around to the end, because I'm going to show you how to turn all those pruned vines into a delicious and nutritious addition to your dinner table. Let's get into it. Sweet potatoes are one of the most rewarding crops you can grow in your garden. They're surprisingly low maintenance. They tolerate heat and drought better than most vegetables, and when you get the pruning right, a single plant can produce an impressive harvest. The good news is that pruning sweet potatoes is actually pretty straightforward once you understand what you're trying to accomplish. So let's start by understanding why we even bother pruning them in the first place. Now, you might be wondering why you'd prune a sweet potato at all. I mean, more leaves means more photosynthesis, right? More energy for the plant. Well, yes and no. Here's the thing about sweet potatoes. They're incredibly vigorous vine producers. In the right conditions, a single plant can send out vines that stretch 10, 15, even 20 feet in every direction. And while that looks impressive, it's not necessarily what we want. See, the plant only has so much energy to work with. When it's putting all that effort into producing mile-long vines and tons of foliage, it's taking energy away from what we actually care about, which is those tubers forming underground. Think of it like a business with limited resources. If you're spending all your budget on marketing, but nothing on actually making your product, you're going to have problems. The plant is the same way. We need to redirect some of that vine energy back into tuber production. Pruning also helps with air circulation, which reduces the risk of fungal diseases. And honestly, it just keeps things manageable. Nobody wants sweet potato vines taking over their entire garden and smothering everything else you've planted. Before we get into the actual pruning techniques, you need to understand how sweet potatoes grow, because it directly affects how and where you're going to make your cuts. Sweet potatoes are different from regular potatoes. Regular potatoes form tubers along underground stems called stolons. Sweet potatoes form their tubers directly from the roots, specifically from the base of the plant where the slip was originally planted. This is really important to understand. The tubers are forming in a cluster right around that original planting point. They're not forming out along the vines. So when you see a vine that's stretched out 8 feet and rooted into the ground at various points along its length, those rooting points are not producing significant tubers. They might produce a few small roots, but the main harvest is happening back at the base of the plant. This is why letting vines root all over the place actually hurts your yield. The plant is diverting energy to establish new root systems instead of fattening up those main tubers. Now, sweet potato vines have nodes along their length, and at each node, you'll typically see a leaf and the potential for roots to form if that node touches moist soil. When we prune, we're managing these vines to keep the plant's energy focused where it belongs. So when should you actually start pruning your sweet potatoes? Timing matters here. You don't want to start too early, because the plant needs to establish itself first. When you plant your slips, whether that's in late spring or early summer, depending on your zone, the plant needs time to develop a good root system and put on some initial growth. I typically wait until the vines are about 2 to 3 feet long before I do any pruning at all. In most zones, that's going to be somewhere around 4 to 6 weeks after planting. For those of you in zones 7 through 9, you're probably planting slips in late May or early June, which means your first pruning would happen sometime in July. If you're in zones 5 or 6 with a shorter season, You might be planting in early June and pruning by mid to late July. The key visual cue is vine length. Once those vines hit that 2 to 3 foot mark and the plant looks healthy and established, you're ready to start. Don't prune a struggling plant. If your sweet potatoes are looking weak or stressed, let them recover first. All right, let's get into the actual pruning process. This is where we're going to make the biggest difference in your harvest. The main technique here is called vine tipping, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You're going to cut off the growing tips of your vines to encourage the plant to put energy into tuber production rather than vine extension. Here's exactly how to do it. First, identify the main vines coming off your plant. You'll typically have anywhere from 4 to 8 main vines depending on the variety and growing conditions. Follow each vine out from the base and locate the growing tip. This is the end of the vine where new leaves are actively forming. Using clean, sharp pruning shears or even just your fingers, if the growth is tender enough, cut or pinch off the last 4 to 6 inches of each vine. You want to make your cut just above a leaf node. Now here's what happens when you do this. The plant can no longer extend that vine, so it redirects its energy. Some of that energy will go into producing side shoots, which is fine, and a good portion will go into fattening up those tubers underground. I do this initial tipping when the vines hit about 3 feet, and then I repeat the process every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the growing season. The other thing you want to do during this initial pruning is lift any vines that have rooted into the ground away from the base of the plant. Gently pull them up and redirect them back toward the main planting area. Or just let them sit on top of the soil or mulch where they can't root in. Some gardeners will actually lay down landscape fabric or a thick layer of straw mulch specifically to prevent the vines from rooting along their length. I've found that simply lifting them every week or two when I'm out checking on the garden does the trick. You don't have to be aggressive about this. Just a gentle redirect to keep those vines from establishing secondary root systems. By the way, if you're finding this helpful so far, take a second to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one. All right, let's keep going. Now that you've done your initial pruning, you need to keep up with it throughout the season. Sweet potatoes don't stop growing just because you pruned them once. In fact, that initial pruning often stimulates a flush of new growth as the plant produces side shoots. This is normal and actually good for overall plant health. Your maintenance routine should include a pruning session every 2 to 3 weeks. During each session, you're doing 3 things. First, tip back any vines that have grown beyond 3 to 4 feet from the base of the plant. Second, lift and redirect any vines that have rooted into the soil away from the main plant. Third, remove any damaged, yellowing, or diseased leaves you come across. Now I want to be clear about something. You're not trying to keep your sweet potato plants looking like neat little bushes. They're going to be sprawling and vigorous no matter what you do. The goal is just to manage that growth so it doesn't get completely out of control. A well-maintained sweet potato bed will still look lush and full, but the vines will be concentrated more around the base rather than stretching out across your entire garden. One thing I've learned over the years is that consistency matters more than perfection here. If you miss a week or two, it's not the end of the world. Just get back on schedule and do a slightly more aggressive pruning session to catch up. The plants are forgiving. What you really want to avoid is ignoring them for the entire season and then wondering why your harvest is disappointing. Let's talk about some common problems you might run into and how to solve them. First, if you notice your vines are turning yellow, starting from the base and working outward, this is usually a sign of overwatering or poor drainage. Sweet potatoes like consistent moisture, but they absolutely hate sitting in waterlogged soil. The solution is to back off on watering and make sure your bed has good drainage. If you're in heavy clay soil, consider growing in raised beds or mounds next season. Second, if you see holes in the leaves, you're probably dealing with sweet potato flea beetles or Japanese beetles. These guys can do a lot of cosmetic damage, but usually won't significantly hurt your harvest unless the infestation is severe. I just hand-pick them when I see them during my pruning sessions. For heavier infestations, neem oil or spinosad can help. Third, if your vines are growing like crazy, but the leaves look pale and the overall growth seems weak, you might have a nitrogen imbalance. Sweet potatoes actually don't need much nitrogen. Too much nitrogen promotes tons of vine growth at the expense of tuber development. This is the opposite of what we want. Back off on fertilizing, especially anything high in nitrogen, and let the plant balance itself out. Fourth, if you notice vines wilting during the heat of the day but recovering in the evening, this is usually just heat stress and not a major concern. Sweet potatoes handle heat well, but they'll sometimes wilt as a way to conserve water. As long as they perk back up in the cooler evening hours, you're fine. If they stay wilted, check your soil moisture. Fifth, if you see leaves with purple or red discoloration, especially on the undersides, this can indicate phosphorus deficiency. This is more common in cooler soils early in the season. As the soil warms up, it usually resolves on its own. If it persists, a side dressing of bone meal can help. The good news is that sweet potatoes are generally tough plants. If you follow the pruning schedule we've talked about and give them decent growing conditions, you should avoid most of these issues altogether. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning, and this one is really going to change how you think about your sweet potato harvest. All those vines you're pruning off? Don't throw them away. Sweet potato leaves and tender vine tips are completely edible, and honestly, they're delicious. In many parts of the world, particularly in Asia and Africa, sweet potato greens are a staple vegetable. They're packed with vitamins A and C, they've got more protein than spinach, and they have a mild, slightly sweet flavor that works in all kinds of dishes. Here's how I use them. Take those vine tips you just pruned, the tender top 6 to 8 inches with the young leaves. Strip off any tough stems and give them a good rinse. From there, you can sauté them just like you would spinach or chard. A little olive oil, some garlic, a pinch of salt, and you've got a fantastic side dish in about 5 minutes. They wilt down quite a bit, so use more than you think you'll need. You can also add them to soups and stews in the last few minutes of cooking, toss them into stir-fries, or even blend them into smoothies if you're into that. My personal favorite is to sauté them with a bit of sesame oil and soy sauce, then serve them over rice. The flavor is somewhere between spinach and a very mild green bean. What I love about this is that it turns your pruning sessions into a double harvest. You're improving your tuber yield while simultaneously getting a fresh vegetable for dinner. Just make sure you're only eating greens from plants that haven't been sprayed with any pesticides and give them a good wash before cooking. Once you start eating sweet potato greens, you'll wonder why more people don't grow this plant just for the foliage. So that's everything you need to know about pruning sweet potatoes for maximum yield and plant health. We covered why pruning matters, how sweet potato growth works, when to start, the exact techniques to use, and how to keep up with maintenance all season long. If you follow this process, you're going to see a real difference in your harvest come fall. Those tubers are going to be bigger, more plentiful, and you'll have gotten some free greens along the way. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And if you have your own sweet potato pruning tips or questions, drop them in the comments below. I read every single one and I love hearing what's working in your garden. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.